chakras. Let's go. Uh, okay. Okay, here we go. We have Bava Metzia, and Bava Metzia says on Hey Chet Dalet, if one exchanges a cow for a donkey and it calves, and similarly, if one sells his maidservant and she gives birth, if this one says it happened before I sold, while this one says it happened after I bought, they divide. If he had two slaves, one large and one small, and similarly, if he had two fields, one large and one small, the buyer claims he bought the large one, while the other says he did not know, he receives the large one. If the seller says he sold the small one, while the other one claims he does not know, he receives only the small one. If this one claims it was a large one, while this one claims it was a small one, the seller must swear that he sold the small one. If both say they do not know, they divide. If one sells his olive trees for the wood, and they produce less than a quarter log per saw, these belong to the owner of the olive trees. If they produce a quarter log per saw, and this one claims my olive trees produced it, while this one claims mine, they divide. If a river watched away his olive trees and placed them in the midst of his neighbor's field, and this one claims my olive trees produced them, while this one claims my land produced them, they divide. If one rents a house to his neighbor, he cannot evict him in the winter from Sukkot until Pesach unless he gives him notice in the summer, 30 days. In big cities, both in the summer and winter, he must give 12 months notice. With stores, both in towns and cities, he must give 12 months notice. The Shimon ben Gamliel says with baskets or dye shops, he must give 3 years notice.
Bakers. Okay. That last word was bakers.
3 years. Oh, I have. I see. Grandmother says with bakers or dye shops, he must get 3 years.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Hamaskir bais lechavero. Okay, so here is this is not like a Torah law of how rental contracts have to work. We're talking about what were the prevailing conditions at the time of the Mishnah. What was the minhag medina? Hamaskir bais lechavero. Hamaskir chayav bedelis beneger b'manul b'chol davar shu maseh uman. So he's got one of the things that's absolutely mandatory in the contract is that the landlord has to provide a door, a lock, and neger is a sort of a deadbolt, the thing that you
put the door, the bolt, and the lock, and everything that is in the work of a craftsman.
And anything else that is that requires a craftsman to make for the security of the house, basically. Or market, a market and like a fence around the roof. If you're using the roof, then so that has to be provided by the landlord. So anything that's not specifically skilled, beg your pardon. The Maaseh Uman is opening the windows or strengthening the roof. That requires somebody who knows what they're doing. But a market doesn't require any particular skill. You can bang up your own kind of fence around the edge of the roof. Okay, and that's a Torah law. Responsibility of the tenant. This is not a Torah law. The market is required to be there by Torah law, but who has to put it up? That's whose responsibility is it to put it up? Is it the landlord? Is it the tenant? That's up to the Minhag Medina. The Mishnah says that in the time in Mishnah's times, it was the responsibility of the tenant to put up the marquee.
That was what I was concerned about. If someone fell and
that's an interesting thing. Like you see what prevailing conditions are. I know when you'd think that when you rent out a shop, for example, that you'd need to put in that the landlord has the responsibility to put in the floor. No, if this is a new building, the first tenant has to pay to put in the tiling on the floor.
That's a law here in Israel.
That's not a law. That's the standard. That's the standard condition when you move into a new shop. The initial furnishings, they give you basically the front door and the lock on the front door. But the kitting out of the shop, all of the laying down of the floor and the lights and whatever else, that's all on the tenant.
It's not going to an apartment. You have to rent the.
That's another thing where you see like completely different customs. Like when you rent a house, I don't know if you rented here before you bought, but you move in and the previous tenant takes out all of the light fittings and leaves you with the Russian chandeliers, right? That's just the way things are done over here. Whereas I thought, what the heck? You can take out light fittings. That's not part of the permanent part. That's not a permanent part of the apartment. And the previous tenant has the right to take out his light fittings.
Are those legal Russian fittings?
Russian chandeliers. You know what a Russian chandelier is? It's the
No,
it's
I
that
just want
it's that it's that it's that wire with a bulb dangling off the end.
and Hungarian is a chandelier, right?
Okay. Well, okay, we said that. Hazevel. Now, one of the things that you have when you've got a yard, um, it's open to the street. Animals, it's kind of like an invitation for animals to walk in and poop in the yard, and that might be a desired effect because poop is useful for as manure, to go and fertilize your field, especially if you've got a field. So okay, great, you can gather this and go and fertilize your field. Lovely. Now the question is, if in our situation in the Mishnah over here, the landlord did not specifically rent the chutzner to the tenant. He just said you're allowed to use it. It's not your space, but you're allowed to use it. So now, if the manure collects in that yard, it belongs to the Baal Habayis because he didn't actually rent it out, even though the socher has got the right to use it. However, so, however, if he has an oven, then the ashes that come out of the oven, even if other people come and use it, those are assumed to belong to the tenant because it's kind of the leftover of his stuff. And once he's entitled to the leftover of his stuff that was in the oven, ashes can be useful also as fertilizer or whatever else you want to use them for. It's interesting to think of a situation where a tenant and a landlord might have a dispute over who owns the ashes. But you got to cover all your bases when you're setting a code of law. If, however, just what's mentioned in parentheses in the commentary is that if the tenant actually rented the chutzner and it's his chutzner, then obviously the manure belongs to him. Mishna ches hamaskir bayis lechaver l'shana. So they write in the contract that this house is rented for a year. And then the Beis Din comes and says, Nis Abra Shana, okay, we're declaring an extra Adar. We now got 13 months in the year. Nis Abra Lasocher, then the tenant gets to win because a year is a year, whether it's 12 or 13 months. Okay, so he gets the extra month free. Amaskir lo lachodashim. However, if the contract stipulates a price per month, okay, Nisabra Shana, Nisabra Lamaskir, then the landlord gets the benefit because the extra month is just another month. Okay. Now, what happens if you have an ambiguous case? מעשה בציפורי באחד שהסחר מרחץ מחברו ב-12 זהב לשנה מדינר זהב לחודש. So they wrote in the contract that this merchatz, the rental of the merchatz, would be 12 gold dinars for the year, or one dinar a month. So now they've stipulated both years and months in it. Okay, so now the Beis Din added an extra adar. So they came to the Beis Din and said, what do we do? Who has to pay the extra month? They said, your contract is ambiguous, so therefore split the extra month and pay half rental. And that is not the halacha. The halacha is that the merchatz remains the property of the landlord, and amotzi mechavero alav haraya. If the tenant wants to say, I want to get an extra month out of this, the contract is ambiguous, he's got to prove that the contract entitles him to an extra month. Otherwise, he's got to pay for it. So the halacha favors the landlord because it's undisputably his property. And if the tenant wants to take it, then he's got to bring a proof that he is entitled to the extra month. Okay. Mishnah tes hamaskir bayis lechavero. He rents a house to his friend, and the house collapses. Okay. Now, what's important is that in this case, the Gemara clarifies that the case over here is a situation not where there's one specific house that the tenant and the landlord agreed on you're going to rent. That's the way we typically work. Because if that were the case, then the landlord could say, listen, the house was 100% fine before you moved in. You know, it's your you wanted this specific house, you got the specific house, and here it is. Okay, LMI. What's the case is where, let's say, the landlord owned let's say a bunch of townhouses. Okay, and they all have the same layout, the same benefits, and whatever. And he's got a sample apartment, and he says, "Do you like this kind of a house?" He says, "Yeah, I like exactly this kind of layout." He says, "Great, I'll rent you a house exactly like this one." So they shook hands and they agreed on this, and this is the contract that he's going to get a house just like this one. Okay, so now the landlord gives him a house just like this one, and that just like this one is the one that collapsed. Okay, now the landlord has got the responsibility, because he didn't say it's this particular. The tenant didn't say, oh, he was mucked on any particular house. He said, I just want a house like this one. It collapsed. Now it's the landlord's problem to find him another house that's exactly the same. Okay, and what does he have to do? He has to find him another house. And if it was a small house, he can't give him a replacement that's too big, because then the tenant can say, I don't want the responsibility of looking after such a big place. A bigger house is more mess and more to clean. Gadol lo yasinu katan, and he can't make it smaller because he says, I need more space. I rented a house with space to do stuff. Okay, so either way, if the tenant disagrees, obviously if they do it by mutual consent, there's nothing to talk about. But if the landlord wants to say, take this place, he says, no, I don't like it, it's too big. No, I don't like it, it's too small. Okay. If he had one dwelling, he says, no, I'll give you two places that together you make up what you need. No, I want one. If he had rented two places that were both small, he says, yeah, I'll give you one place that's all together. No, I like to have the granny flat for my mother-in-law. She wants to stay over there, and I like her separate. Okay, so he can dispute that. He may not even detract from the number of windows, and he can't add to the number of windows, because again, windows are an ambiguous thing. Maybe you like a lot of windows because of the light. Maybe you don't like a lot of windows because you like privacy. Everything, any change from the original plan has to be agreed on by both parties. And that's it. Okay, Chazar.
Vav bet. If one hires craftsmen and they retract, they are at a disadvantage. If they hire retracts, he is at a disadvantage. Whoever deviates is at a disadvantage, and whoever retracts is at a disadvantage. If one rents a donkey to drive it on the mountain, and he drives it in the valley, and he drives it on the mountains, even if this is 10 mil and this is 10 mil, and it dies, he's liable. If one rents a donkey to drive it on the mountain and he drives it in the valley, if it slips, he's exempt. If it dies from the heat, he is liable. If he rents it to drive in the valley and he drives it on the mountains, if he slips, he is liable. But if he dies from the heat, he is exempt. And if he dies because of the ascent, he is liable. If one rents a donkey and he becomes killed or seized for blind or is seized for public service, you may say to him, that which is yours was before you. If he dies or breaks a leg, he is obligated to provide him with another donkey. Next. If one rents a crow to plow on the mountains, you can't plow a crow. If one rents a cow to plow on the mountains and he plows in the valley, if the coulter breaks, he's exempt. If he rents it to plow in the valley and he plows it on the mountains, if the coulter breaks, he's liable through beans. And
he's liable.
He's liable to thresh beans. And if he threshes grains, he is exempt to thresh grain. And if he threshes beans, he's liable because beans are slippery. Okay.
Bava Kama Zayin Bes.
If according to two witnesses a person stole, and according to them or according to two others he slaughtered or sold, he pays the fourfold or fivefold payment. If one stole and sold on the Sabbath, stole and sold for idolatry, sold and slaughtered on Yom Kippur, stole from his father, slaughtered or sold it, and then his father died or sold or stole and slaughtered and then consecrated, he pays the fourfold or fivefold payment. If one stole and slaughtered for medical purposes or for dogs, if one slaughtered and it was found to have an organic defect, or if one slaughters an ordinary animal in the temple courtyard, he pays the fourfold or fivefold payment. Reb Shimon exempts him in these two instances. If according to two witnesses a person stole, and according to them he slaughtered or sold, they are found to be false witnesses and they pay in full. If according to two witnesses he stole, and according to two others he slaughtered or sold, and both of them were found to be false witnesses, the first one pays the twofold payment, the second one pays the threefold payment. If the second one was found to be false witnesses, they twofold payment. He pays the twofold payment, and they pay the threefold payment. If one of the second ones is found to be false, the second testimony is void. If one of the first ones is found to be false, the entire testimony is void, where there is no theft, there is no slaughter, and no sale. According to two witnesses, one stole, and according to one witness by his own confession, he slaughtered or sold, he pays the twofold payment, but he does not pay the fourfold or fivefold payment. If he stole and slaughtered on Shabbos, stole and slaughtered for idolatry, stole from his father, and his father died, and afterward he slaughtered or sold, stole and consecrated, and afterwards slaughtered or sold, he pays a twofold payment, but he does not pay the four or fivefold payment. Reb Shimon says, for consecrated animals for which he is responsible, he pays the fourfold or fivefold payment, and for those to which he is not responsible, he is exempt. Okay.
Nazir, Gimel Zayin.
Okay. What happened? What did I do? Oh, here it is. Put it in the wrong place. Okay. Someone about whom two sets of witnesses were testifying, though these testified that he declared 2 terms of Naziris, and these testified that he declared 5 terms of Naziris. Ben Shammai says the testimony is split and there is no Naziris here. So Beis Hillel says 2 is included in 5, and so that he is a Nazir for 2 terms. Someone who said, I am a Nazir, and his friend heard and said, and I, they are all Nazirim. If the first is released, they are all released. If the last is released, the last is permitted, but all the others are bound. If he said, I am a Nazir, and his friend heard and said, my mouth is like his mouth, or my hair is like his hair, he's a Nazir. If he said, I am a Nazir, and his wife heard and said, and he may revoke hers, but his stands. And if she said, I am a Nazira, and her husband heard and said, and he cannot revoke it. If he said, I am a Nazir, and you, and she said, Amen, and revoke hers, but
He can revoke hers.
I'm sorry. He can revoke hers, but his stands. If she said, I am a Nazir, and you, and he said, Amen, he cannot revoke.
Because he's implicitly confirmed her Naziris already when he says, yeah, I'm also. He now can't go back and say, no, it's yours is mutar.
Okay. We have Yud.
Ches.
Yes, right. Yeah, you can. One may not conclude the feast after eating the Pesach of dessert. If some fell asleep, they may eat, and if all, they may not eat. Rabbi Yossi says they doze, they may eat. If they fell into a deep sleep, they may not eat. The Pesach offering contaminates one's hands. Sorry. After midnight, pickle and leftover sacrificial meat contaminate the hands. If he recited the blessing for the Pesach offering, he exempts the blessing of the Chagiga offering. But if he recited that of the Chagiga offering, he does not exempt that of the Pesach offering. These are the words of Rosh Yishmael. And Kiva says this one does not exempt that one, nor does that one exempt this one.
Okay, have you got Shekalim ready?
I'm sorry, what did you say? We got which one?
We're going to do one from Shekalim now.
I'll pick it up. Sorry, on the 1st of Adar, they proclaim about the payment of the Shkalim and about Chaim. On the 15th of Adar, they read the Megillah in the walled cities. They commence to repair the roads, the town squares, and accumulations of water, and they attend to all the public needs. They mark the graves, and they also go out to inspect the fields for Kalai.
Okay. Sharon.
Okay. Hey, you. If one pours from a hot vessel into a hot vessel, or from a cold vessel into a cold vessel, or from a hot vessel into a cold vessel, it is tahor. From a cold vessel into a hot vessel, it is tameh. Red Shimon says, even if one pours from a hot vessel into a hot vessel, and the strength of the lower one is greater than that of the upper one, it is tameh. If a woman whose hands were tahor was stirring a tameh pot, and if her hands perspired, they are tameh. If her hands were tameh and then she was stirring a tahor pot, if her hands perspired, the pot is tameh. Rabbi Yossi says, if they dripped. If someone weighed grapes in the pan of a scale, the wine in the pail is tahor until he pours into the container. This is similar to baskets of grapes, olives and grapes when they are dripping. If someone took his produce up to the roof on account of insects and dew descends on it, it is not included in the law of order was placed, and if he intended for this, it is included in the law of order was placed. If a deaf, mute, deranged person of minor took up produce, even if he intended for the dew to fall upon the produce, it is not included in the law of order was placed, for they have to act, but no, have an act, but not intent. If someone bought bundles of
We're done. We're done. Okay. And Arachin.
If someone declares a karam, his son or daughter, if son declares karam, his son or his daughter, his Hebrew maidservant or maidservant, and he acquired land, and they do not become karam, because a person cannot render karam something that is not his. Kohanim and Leviim cannot declare a karam. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon says Kohanim cannot declare a karam because the karayim belong to them. However, Leviim can declare a karam because the karayim do not belong to them. Rebbe says the view of Rabbi Yehuda is indicated with respect to real property, as it is says for an internal building holding for them, and the view of Rabbi Shimon with respect to movable property, inasmuch as the karayim do not belong to them. The karamim, that's right, not karayim is chicken. The karamim dedicated to the Kohanim are not redeemable, are given to the Kohanim. Rabbi Yehuda ben Metzia says unspecified karamim are for the repairs of the temple, as he says, as it says in Leviticus, any karam is most holy to Hashem. But the come and say unspecified karamim are for the Kohanim, as it is said that the karam field, like the karam field, his ancestral holding shall go to the Kohen. If so, why was it say any karam is most holy to Hashem? To teach that it takes effect kadoshim, kadoshim, and kadoshi kelim. A person can declare karam is consecrated animals if they kodesh kadoshim or kadoshim kelim. If it is a neder, he gives the worth of the animal. If it's an avada, he gives his benefit to him. If one said this ox shall be an olah offering, we evaluate how much a person would be willing to give for this ox, to offer it as an olah offering that it is not obligated to bring. Like a bakor, whether it is unblemished or blemished, one may declare a karam. If how do they redeem it? They redeem it as evaluate how much a person would be willing to give for this bakor, and it be given to his daughter or his daughter's son or his sister's son. If Ishmael says, one verse states that you shall consecrate, while another verse states that one may not consecrate, it's impossible to say consecrate, for it is already stated that one may not consecrate. It is similarly impossible to say it did not consecrate, for it has been already said consecrate. Therefore, you must now say you may consecrate it as a consecration of assessment, but you cannot consecrate it as a consecration of the altar.
And we are done. Okay.
All right. All right. Have a great day. Thank you very much.
Tomorrow, Mitzvah Shem.
See you tomorrow. Be well. Bye.